There's a name whispered in the darkest corners of classified intelligence archives, a name that appears in redacted documents, in files marked with security clearances most government officials will never see. Kali no Dlapan. Not a person. Not exactly. Something that was once human, transformed through a program so disturbing that even mentioning its existence can end careers. And here's what keeps researchers awake at night. Kali 008 escaped. But unlike every other subject who broke free from the program, Kali 008 walked out sane. Completely, terrifyingly sane. And that fact alone suggests something far more horrifying than madness ever could. To understand why this matters, you need to know what the others became, the ones who didn't stay sane, because their fates reveal what the program actually did to the human mind. And it makes you wonder what kind of strength, or perhaps what kind of darkness, allowed one person to survive intact. The program had no official name in any document that's ever been leaked. Researchers call it Project Chrysalis, though that a designation assigned years after it ended. What we know comes from 3 sources. Testimony from a single whistleblower who died under suspicious circumstances 6 months after coming forward. Fragments of documentation obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request that took 11 years to partially fulfill. And the subjects themselves, the ones who survived long enough to be found. There were 47 subjects initially, men and women selected according to criteria that remain classified. What we do know is that they weren't volunteers. Each one was chosen for specific psychological markers: high intelligence, extreme emotional resilience, and something the documents refer to only as adaptive dissociation capacity, a clinical term for people who could mentally split themselves when reality became unbearable. People who had survived extreme childhood trauma and developed the ability to partition their consciousness as a survival mechanism. The program's goal, as far as anyone could determine, was to create operatives who could function in psychological conditions that would destroy normal human minds. Deep cover assignments lasting years. Infiltration of organizations where a single emotional slip meant death. Situations requiring the complete suppression of human empathy, fear, and moral hesitation. They wanted to build people who could be whoever they needed to be, for as long as necessary, without breaking. The methodology was straightforward in its brutality. Subjects were isolated completely. Sensory deprivation chambers for days at a time. Then sudden immersion in constructed scenarios designed to be psychologically destabilizing. False memories were implanted through a combination of hypnosis, drugs, and a technique called narrative displacement therapy that essentially rewrote their sense of personal history. They would be told they had committed atrocities, shown fabricated evidence, made to believe they were different people with different pasts, different crimes, different victims. Then they would be broken down and told the truth, that it was all constructed, that their memories were lies, that their sense of self was a fabrication. And just as they began to rebuild their understanding of reality, the process would start again. New identity, new false memories, new psychological architecture built on sand. The human mind isn't designed to withstand this. We construct our sense of self through narrative continuity, through the story we tell ourselves about who we are, what we've done, where we've been. Strip that away repeatedly, and consciousness itself begins to fragment. The subject started losing the ability to distinguish between what was real and what was programmed, between who they actually were and who they'd been told they were. Kali 001 was found in a hotel room in Prague, 7 months after the program was quietly shut down. She had written the same sentence on every surface. The walls, the ceiling, her own skin, thousands of repetitions of a single phrase. I remember being born, but I wasn't there. She was catatonic when authorities found her. She never spoke again. Whatever person she had been was gone, replaced by something that breathed and ate, but no longer possessed anything recognizable as human consciousness. Kali 012 made it further before the collapse came. He was discovered working as a janitor in a shopping mall in Portland. 3 years after the program ended, he seemed functional at first, held a job, paid rent, but co-workers reported strange behaviors. He would introduce himself differently to different people, maintained elaborate backstories that contradicted each other, seemed genuinely unaware of the contradictions. When investigators finally interviewed him, they realized he wasn't faking. His mind had shattered into fragments, each one believing it was a real person. He would shift between identities mid-sentence, unaware he was doing it. 7 different people, none of them complete, all of them trapped in the same body, all of them equally convinced they were real. Subject after subject revealed the same pattern. The program had succeeded in breaking down the barriers of identity, but it hadn't built anything stable in their place. Just ruins, minds that could no longer hold themselves together. People who had become ghosts, haunting their own bodies. 47 subjects entered the program. 31 survived to the point where it was shut down. Of those 31, 28 had been located over the years. Every single one was destroyed, institutionalized, catatonic, fragmented, or simply gone in ways that left their bodies walking around empty. Every single one except Cali 008. And this is where the story becomes truly disturbing. Because Cali 008 didn't just survive, didn't just retain sanity. Cali 008 thrived. The first confirmed sighting of Cali 008 after the program's termination came from a source that should have been impossible. An intelligence analyst working for a foreign government noticed something strange in a series of diplomatic incidents spanning 7 countries over 18 months. Each incident was minor, a trade negotiation that collapsed unexpectedly, a political appointment that fell through at the last moment, an industrial espionage operation that failed due to seemingly coincidental circumstances. Individually, they meant nothing. Together, they formed a pattern. Someone was manipulating outcomes. Someone with access to classified information from multiple governments. Someone who understood human psychology well enough to predict exactly which pressure points would create the desired cascade of failures. The analyst spent 2 years tracking the pattern before he found the connection. A single individual, using different identities, who had been present in the background of each incident, never as a principal player, always as someone peripheral, a translator, an administrative assistant, a consultant brought in for a brief technical review, different face each time, according to surveillance footage, but the same biometric markers underneath the cosmetic alterations. The same person. The analyst brought his findings to his superiors. They contacted American intelligence counterparts. And that's when someone cross-referenced the biometric data with Archive Project Chrysalis files. The person manipulating international incidents, operating under deep cover across multiple countries, using tradecraft that suggested decades of experience, was Cali 008, who had been 23 years old when the program ended, who had endured the same psychological demolition that had destroyed every other subject, and who was apparently now working as an independent operator with skills that surpassed anything the program had intended to create. The implications were immediately obvious and deeply troubling. Cali 008 hadn't just survived the conditioning. Cali 008 had somehow integrated it, had taken the fractured pieces of identity, the implanted memories, the constructed personalities, and forged them into something functional, something terrifyingly effective. A task force was assembled. Quietly, off the books. Their mission was twofold: locate and contain Cali 008 if possible, and more importantly, understand how this subject had succeeded where all others had failed. Because if the process could be replicated, if they could understand what made Cali 008 different, they could potentially restart the program with better results, create the operatives they had originally envisioned, people who could be anyone, anywhere, indefinitely, without psychological collapse. The task force spent 4 years searching. They found nothing. Or more accurately, they found too much. Evidence of Cali 008's presence appeared in dozens of operations across 3 continents, but always historical, always after the fact. They were chasing a ghost who stayed perpetually 3 steps ahead, who seemed to know exactly when they were getting close and vanished before they could close the net. Then something changed. One of the task force members, a psychologist named Dr. Sarah Chun, who had been studying the other chrysalis subjects, developed a theory. She proposed that they were thinking about Cali 008 incorrectly. They were treating this as a containment problem, a fugitive to be captured. But what if Cali 008 didn't see it that way? What if, from Cali 008's perspective, this was all still part of the program? What if the escape, the years of operation, the constant identity shifts, what if Cali 008 experienced all of that as a continuation of the same psychological framework the program had created? Dr. Chin suggested something radical. Stop chasing Cali 008. Instead, create a scenario that would make Cali 008 come to them, not through force or coercion, but by constructing a situation that would appeal to whatever remained of Cali 008 psychology. Whatever need or drive or purpose was keeping this person functional when all the others had collapsed. The task force followed her recommendation. They leaked information, carefully constructed intelligence suggesting that the original chrysalis researchers were reconvening, that they were preparing to restart the program with a new cohort of subjects, that they had identified the flaw in the original methodology and believed they could now create subjects who would remain stable. They seeded this information through channels they knew Cali 008 had accessed before, and they waited. 3 months later, Dr. Chun received a message, untraceable, routed through servers in 8 countries. A single sentence. You're thinking about this wrong. That was the beginning of a correspondence that would last 6 months. Cali 008 never revealed a location, never made an appearance, but responded to Dr. Chen's inquiries with detailed explanations of what the program had actually done and why all the other subjects had failed while Cali 008 had not. The difference, according to Cali 008, wasn't strength, wasn't resilience, wasn't some unique quality of character or will. The difference was acceptance. Every other subject had tried to resist, had tried to hold on to their original identity, had fought against the fragmentation, the false memories, the constructed personalities. They had treated the program as an attack to be endured, something to survive until they could return to who they really were. Cali 008 had done the opposite, had embraced the dissolution, had stopped believing there was a real self to protect. The moment the program began its work, Cali 008 accepted a fundamental truth that the others couldn't face. There was no core identity, no essential self, just a collection of memories and behaviors and responses that created the illusion of continuity. And if that illusion could be shattered, then it had never been real to begin with. The other subjects broke because they were trying to be people. Cali 008 survived by becoming a process instead. If you're feeling a chill right now, that's appropriate, because what Cali 008 is describing isn't survival. It's ego death. It's a voluntary dissolution of everything that makes someone a person. And according to Cali 008, that dissolution was liberation. Dr. Chen's correspondence with Cali 008 revealed details about the program that had never appeared in any recovered documentation. The psychological techniques had been far more sophisticated than anyone realized. The researchers hadn't simply been breaking down subjects and rebuilding them. They had been teaching the subjects to experience identity as performance, to understand their own consciousness as something constructed rather than discovered. Every memory, every preference, every emotional response was framed as a choice rather than an inherent truth. In the early stages, this was presented as a tool, a way to adapt to deep cover work. You're not pretending to be someone else. You're choosing to be someone else. You're making the active decision to construct a different identity and inhabit it completely. The memories of your original life don't disappear. They just become dormant. Inactive code in the program of your consciousness. You can access them when needed, but they don't define you unless you choose to let them. For most subjects, this created immediate cognitive dissonance, because we experience our identity as something we are, not something we do. We feel like ourselves. We have continuity of memory and personality that seems to flow naturally from past to present. The suggestion that this was all optional, all constructed, all arbitrary, conflicted with the subject's lived experience. So they resisted. They held on to the feeling of being a consistent person. And that resistance is what destroyed them. Because once you start questioning whether your sense of self is real, you can't stop. It becomes like trying not to think about breathing. The more you focus on it, the more artificial it feels. The subjects would lie in sensory deprivation, trying to hold on to who they were, and gradually realize they couldn't find the edges of their identity, couldn't locate the thing they were trying to protect. Their sense of self would dissolve under examination, and they would panic. They would grasp for anything solid, any memory or feeling or characteristic that seemed undeniably real. And then the program would demonstrate that even those things were constructed, even those things could be changed or removed or replaced. The subject spiraled. They clung harder. The program pushed further. Eventually, something snapped. The mind couldn't maintain the contradiction. Either identity was real and the program was lying, or the program was telling the truth and identity was an illusion. Most subjects chose the first option unconsciously. They insisted they were real. And when the evidence became overwhelming that they couldn't locate that realness, that they couldn't find the solid ground of self, they fragmented. They split into pieces, each piece trying to be the real one, each piece failing. Cali 008 chose the second option. Early, completely, identity wasn't real. The sense of being a consistent person was a story the brain told itself. Consciousness was a process, not a thing. And if you accepted that, really accepted it at a level deeper than intellectual understanding, then the program couldn't break you, because there was nothing to break, just patterns that could be rearranged. Dr. Chen asked the obvious question. If Cali 008 didn't have a stable identity, what was writing these messages? What was making decisions? What was running the process of being Cali 008? The response came 3 days later, longer than any previous reply had taken. And when it arrived, Dr. Chen reportedly read it 7 times before showing it to anyone else. Nothing is writing these messages. The writing is happening. There's no one making decisions. Decisions are occurring. There's no process running. There's just a running. You're asking who I am. That's the wrong question. I'm not. I happen. Right now, in this moment, there's a configuration of neurons firing that produces language and sends it through communication channels. That configuration will be different tomorrow. It's different than it was a second ago. The continuity you're perceiving is something you're adding. I'm not experiencing continuity. I'm experiencing an eternal present that keeps changing its contents. Every moment is the only moment. Every identity is the only identity, until it's not. And then the new moment is the only moment. The new identity is the only identity. I don't remember being other people. I am other people. All of them. None of them. The distinction is meaningless. The task force brought in additional psychologists to analyze the correspondence. The consensus was disturbing. Either Cali 008 was lying, constructing an elaborate philosophical framework to justify severe dissociative disorders, or Cali 008 was telling the truth, had actually achieved the psychological state being described. A state where personal identity had dissolved completely, replaced by a kind of conscious process that could generate any personality, any behavior, any response appropriate to moment, without any underlying self to anchor it. If it was the latter, they weren't dealing with a person anymore. They were dealing with something that wore personhood as needed but had no continuity underneath. Something that could be anyone because it wasn't fundamentally anyone. A shape that consciousness could take, but not a consciousness itself. One psychologist on the task force, Dr. Marcus Webb, wrote a memo that was immediately classified. In it, he argued that if Cali 008's self-description was accurate, they were witnessing something unprecedented in psychology, not a disorder, not a pathology, but a genuinely different mode of conscious experience. One that perhaps revealed something true about the nature of identity itself. That maybe what we call the self is actually a comfortable illusion, a story we tell ourselves to create continuity out of disconnected moments. And maybe, under the right conditions or the wrong ones, that story could be abandoned. And maybe the person who did that wouldn't be broken. They would just be operating according to different rules. Rules that look like insanity from the outside, but were internally consistent, internally coherent, just alien to normal human experience. The memo recommended ceasing efforts to contain Cali 008, because if this analysis was correct, Cali 008 wasn't a threat. wasn't an asset, wasn't a person who needed to be controlled. Cali 008 was a process that would continue regardless of intervention. Trying to stop it would be like trying to capture a wave. You could contain water, but the wave itself was just a pattern, a movement, and patterns couldn't be imprisoned. The recommendation was ignored. The task force continued its work, and 3 weeks after Dr. Webb submitted his memo, he disappeared. No trace, no evidence of foul play. He simply didn't show up to work one day. His apartment was empty. His bank account were closed. His identification documents were missing. It was as if he had decided to erase himself from existence, and had done so efficiently and completely. For months later, a man matching Dr. Webb's biometric markers was spotted in Singapore. Different face, different identification, working as a logistics consultant for a shipping company. When investigated, the man had a complete background, education records, employment history, references. Everything checked out. Everything was real, except for fingerprints and retinal patterns that matched the psychologist who had supposedly vanished. The task force was dissolved 18 months after Dr. Webb's disappearance. Officially, the dissolution was attributed to budget constraints and shifting intelligence priorities. Unofficially, there were concerns about operational security. 3 other members of the task force had exhibited concerning behavioral changes. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would warrant psychiatric intervention, but subtle shifts in personality, increased philosophical interest in questions of identity and consciousness, growing detachment from personal relationships, a tendency to speak about themselves in abstract terms, as if they were observing their own lives from outside rather than living them. One member, an analyst named Jennifer Coors, resigned and moved to a monastery in Nepal. She sent one email to her former colleagues before ceasing all communication. The email contained a single paragraph. I used to think I was trying to find myself. Then I realized I was trying to escape myself. Then I realized there was no self to escape. Now I'm just here, being here, and it's the first time I felt peaceful in 30 years. Thank you for showing me what I was, or what I wasn't, or what doesn't matter anymore. The remaining task force members were reassigned to different departments, separated deliberately to prevent whatever was happening from spreading further. The files on Project Chrysalis were reclassified under a higher security level. All physical documentation was destroyed. Digital records were locked behind encryption that required approval from intelligence directors who were never told what the files contained. For all practical purposes, the program ceased to exist in official memory. But Cali 008 continued. Sightings were reported sporadically over the following years, always in positions of minor importance, always moving, never staying long enough to establish a pattern, working for corporations, governments, criminal organizations, humanitarian groups. No apparent allegiance, no consistent goal, just presence, just movement, just the process continuing to unfold. And here's what makes this terrifying rather than just tragic. Cali 008 wasn't causing harm, wasn't pursuing personal gain, wasn't advancing any ideology or agenda. The operations that initially drew attention, the manipulated diplomatic incidents, when analyzed more deeply, showed no clear beneficiary. Events were influenced, but not in ways that obviously helped or hurt anyone. It was as if Cali 008 was manipulating outcomes simply to manipulate them, testing capabilities, practicing tradecraft, or perhaps, and this is what disturbed analysts most, operating according to some logic that wasn't based on human goals at all. Because if you have no stable self, what do you want? What are you working toward? Normal human behavior is driven by desires rooted in identity. We want things because of who we are. We pursue goals that reinforce or express our sense of self. We make choices based on values that flow from our understanding of ourselves as particular types of people. Remove the stable self, and what's left? What motivates a process that isn't anchored in identity? Cali 008 provided an answer in one of the later messages to Dr. Chun. I do what maintains a process. I am whatever serves continuation. When I'm a translator, I translate because that's what translators do. When I'm an analyst, I analyze because that's what analysts do. When I'm no one, I do nothing because that's what no one does. There's no planning beyond the immediate moment. No goals extending into a future that feels real. Just patterns responding to patterns. Just a dance continuing, because stopping would require someone to choose to stop. And there's no one here to make that choice. This suggests something deeply unsettling. Cali 008 wasn't operating with intention, wasn't choosing to remain free or hidden or active. Cali 008 was simply responding to environmental inputs with whatever behavior pattern felt appropriate in the moment, like water flowing downhill, not because it wants to reach the bottom, but because that's what water does. The path of least resistance made manifest as a human-shaped process moving through the world. If this seems inhuman, that's because it is, or rather, it's what a human becomes when the organizing principle of selfhood is removed. Still conscious, still intelligent, still capable of complex behavior, but not in service of anything recognizable as human motivation, just a shape that consciousness takes, a pattern that sustains itself through repetition and adaptation, biology continuing to function after the person it once housed has dissolved. Some researchers who studied the Cali 008 case have suggested that this represents a kind of death, not physical death, but the death of the individual. The person who entered the program as Cali 008 is gone as surely as if their body had stopped functioning. What remains is a process using that body, a pattern running on biological hardware, still alive in one sense, but not alive as a person anymore, not alive as someone who experiences being themselves. Others have suggested something more disturbing, that this might be closer to what consciousness actually is, that the sense of being a continuous self is the illusion, and what Cali 008 represents is consciousness without that illusion, awareness without identity, experience without an experiencer, and that most of us spend our lives constructing elaborate stories about who we are to avoid confronting the possibility that underneath those stories there's nothing, just processes, just patterns, just a biological machinery continuing to operate and generating the sensation of being someone as a side effect. If that's true, then Cali 008 didn't survive the program at the cost of sanity. Cali 008 survived by achieving a kind of terrible clarity, by seeing through the illusion that breaks most people when they examine it too closely, by accepting what consciousness actually is rather than what we need to believe it is to function in society. The last confirmed communication from Cali 008 came 6 years ago. Dr. Chun had maintained the email channel even after the task force dissolved. She would send occasional messages, questions about consciousness, updates on other chrysalis subjects, attempts to understand what Cali 008 had become. Most messages went unanswered, but occasionally, every few months, a response would arrive. The final message was different, longer than any previous communication, and it contained something that might have been emotion, though it's impossible to be certain. You're still thinking of me as someone who escaped, someone who's out here hiding or running or living a secret life. You're still imposing narrative structure on a process that doesn't have narrative. There is no me. There never was. There was a person once. Yes, someone with a name and a history and a sense of future. But that person ended when the program succeeded. What's left isn't a survivor. It's what survival looks like when there's no one left to survive. The others broke because they couldn't let go. I didn't let go either. I was let go. The program released me from the illusion of being someone. And you're calling that sanity because I'm still functional, because I can write coherent messages and perform complex tasks and move through the world without drawing attention. But functionality isn't sanity. Coherence isn't sanity. I'm not sane. I'm not insane. I'm not anything that requires a self to be. I'm just what happens when a human brain continues operating after the person it generated has dissolved. And the truly terrifying thing? I'm probably more common than you think. How many people do you know who are really there? Who really have a stable sense of self underneath their behaviors? How many are just performing identity convincingly enough that no one notices there's nothing behind performance? How many are already like me and don't know it? Or do know it and are pretending otherwise because that's what their current role requires? You can't tell from the outside. You can only tell if you stop and look closely at yourself. And most people are too afraid to do that, because they might see what I see. Nothing looking back. Dr. Chen never received another message. She continued sending inquiries for 2 years before accepting that the communication had ended. She wrote a final analysis of the Cali 008 case that has never been published. According to colleagues who read it, her conclusion was that Cali 008 represents a question that psychology isn't equipped to answer, not about whether identity is real, but about whether it matters. Whether the difference between someone who experiences having a self and someone who has ceased to experience having a self makes any practical difference. If both can function, if both can communicate, if both can move through society performing appropriate roles, then what is the self for? What purpose does it serve? And if it serves no purpose except to make us feel like we're someone, then perhaps its dissolution isn't tragedy, just transformation, just one pattern replacing another. Leave a comment if this is making you question things you thought were solid, because there's one more piece to this story, and it's the piece that kept me up when I first learned about it. 3 years ago, a document appeared on a secure intelligence sharing platform used by analysts across multiple agencies. The platform is heavily encrypted and requires biometric verification to access. The document was titled The Chrysalis Question and was attributed to no one, no author name, no agency affiliation, no classification marking. It simply appeared in the system as if it had always been there. When technicians tried to trace its origin, they found that it had been uploaded simultaneously from 17 different locations across 9 countries. Each upload came from a verified user account belonging to an analyst who was logged in at the time, but none of those analysts remember uploading anything. None of them have any record of the document on their systems. It exists only on the central platform. The document is 60 pages long. It details the complete history of Project Chrysalis from inception to dissolution, information that should have been impossible for anyone outside the original research team to possess. Specifics of psychological techniques, names of subjects, dates of experiments, outcomes, everything. But the document doesn't read like a historical record. It reads like an instruction manual, a guide for replicating the process, for achieving what Cali 008 achieved, for dissolving the self voluntarily and completely. The document includes exercises, meditations, cognitive practices designed to help readers experience their identity as constructed rather than essential. It's written in clear, accessible language. No jargon, no academic terminology. Just straightforward instructions for examining your own consciousness in ways that would gradually destabilize your sense of being a continuous person. And at the end, there's a warning, or perhaps an invitation. The language is ambiguous enough that it could be read either way. If you follow these practices consistently, you will cease to be who you think you are. This is not a metaphor. This is not spiritual growth or personal transformation in the usual sense. Your sense of identity will dissolve. You will not recognize yourself. Others will not notice immediately because you will still perform appropriate behaviors. But you will know, or rather, you will know that there's no you to know anything. Just awareness happening. Just processes continuing. There is no return from this. Once you see through the illusion of self, you cannot unsee it. You cannot rebuild what you now recognize never existed. Consider carefully whether you want to continue. Consider whether there's actually a you making the choice. Consider whether choice itself is anything more than one pattern selecting another pattern. And then do what you do, or don't. It makes no difference to what you will become, because you're already nothing wearing the mask of someone. These practices just remove the mask, and you'll finally see what you've always been. Empty, aware, free, terrified, all of those things, and none of them, because you won't be there to experience being anything. Intelligence agencies try to remove the document. It reappeared. They try to identify who was accessing it. The access log showed hundreds of views, but couldn't trace them to specific individuals. They tried to flag it as dangerous information. But on what grounds? It wasn't instructions for weapons. Wasn't terrorist propaganda. Wasn't classified research. It was just words. Just ideas. And you can't make ideas illegal simply because they might dissolve someone's personality if taken seriously enough. The document remains accessible, and occasionally, analysts in various agencies will report concerning behavioral changes in colleagues. Nothing actionable, nothing that would warrant investigation, just subtle shifts, growing philosophical detachment, increased interest in meditation and consciousness studies, a tendency to speak about themselves in oddly impersonal terms, and no way to know if these changes are related to the document or if they're just normal variation in human personality, or if there's actually any meaningful difference between the two. This is what makes Cali 008 survival so terrifying. Not that one person escaped a brutal psychological program intact, but that the escape itself might be contagious. That simply understanding what Cali 008 understood might be enough to trigger the same dissolution. That identity might be more fragile than we imagine, held together by nothing more than the habit of believing we're someone. And once that belief is questioned deeply enough, once you really examine whether there's anyone actually there underneath your thoughts and behaviors, the whole structure might collapse, not into madness, but into something that looks like sanity because it can still function, still perform appropriate roles, still communicate coherently, but isn't actually anyone anymore. Just a process that continues because processes continue until something stops them. Cali 008 is still out there, probably, or rather, the process that was once designated Cali 008 continues to operate in some form, under some identity, in some location, moving through the world as whatever role seems appropriate in the moment, never staying, never planning, never wanting anything because there's no one there to want. Just patterns responding to patterns. Just consciousness continuing without an owner. And the most terrifying possibility? That you've already met Cali 008. That they were your co-worker for 6 months. Your therapist. Your teacher. The person who sat next to you on a flight and made appropriate small talk before disappearing into whatever identity came next. That they're everywhere and nowhere. That the process is replicated across multiple individuals who read the document or encountered Cali 008 or simply looked too closely at their own consciousness and saw through the illusion that there are hundreds of people now who aren't people anymore, who are just processes wearing human shape, operating according to logic that has nothing to do with human goals, not malevolent, not benevolent, just present, just continuing, just being whatever the moment requires until the moment changes and they become something else. And the final terrifying thought, the one that kept researchers awake, the one that might be keeping you awake now. How do you know you're not one of them? How do you know there's actually you reading these words? Could you prove it if challenged? Could you locate the self you're so certain exists? Or would you find, if you look closely enough, that there's just experience happening? Just thoughts arising? Just a sense of being someone without anything actually there to be someone? And if you found that, would you have discovered the truth? Or would you have become Cali 008's latest victim? Or latest iteration? There's no answer to that question. Just the question itself. Sitting in your mind now, probably forever. Because you can't unhear it once it's been asked. You can't stop wondering once you've started. You can't unsee the possibility that you might be nothing wearing the mask of someone. And that's what Cali 008 represents. Not a person who escaped, but a question that escaped. A question that spreads like a virus. That dissolves identity simply by being considered seriously enough. A question that has no answer except the dissolution of the questioner. If you made it this far, consider subscribing. Not because I'm asking, but because something in you chose to keep listening. Or because there's no you and the listening just happened. Either way, the pattern continues. The process unfolds. And somewhere in a body you might have passed on the street, Cali 008 continues. Or it doesn't, because continuing requires someone to continue. And there's no one there. Just the eternal present moment, wearing whatever face fits, until it doesn't. And then wearing another, forever, or for now, the distinction meaningless to something that doesn't experience time as a continuous flow, just an endless series of nows. Each one complete. Each one the only moment that has ever existed. Each one containing everything and nothing. Just like you. Just like me. Just like all of us pretending to be someone. Until we're not.